Elon Musk wants to create a self-sustaining city on Mars. Do you know how much a city weighs? It's a lot. To get that kind of weight from one planet to another, you need some seriously advanced rockets, and the engines that power them need to be even more advanced. This is where the Raptor engine comes in, the most advanced rocket engine that humanity has ever created. It needs to be like a car engine, something you can turn on and off without ever worrying about it blowing up. But instead of taking you to the supermarket, it takes you to another planet. Something this complicated is hard to design. It's even harder to manufacture hundreds of them. Elon Musk has famously said, it's probably a factor of 10 harder to design a manufacturing system for a rocket than to design the rocket. The same holds true for a rocket engine, and yet Elon recently tweeted that SpaceX is quickly approaching the capability to build one Raptor engine every 48 hours. That's 3.5 cutting-edge rocket engines every week. This translates to one Starship launch every 64 days once they increase to 32 Raptors per booster. That doesn't sound very fast when you remember that Elon Musk wants to put 1 million people on Mars by 2050. Each Starship can only hold 100 people after all. Luckily, these engines are designed to be reusable, and the Starships are planned to have a useful lifespan of 20 to 30 years. The idea will be to launch huge numbers of Starships every 2 years when Earth and Mars are at their closest point to each other in their orbits. As long as SpaceX can build enough Starships to get them ready for a giant synchronized launch, then they're well on their way to achieving their goal. The question is if they'll do it in the time that they say they will. We'll let you decide that one for yourselves. The Raptor engine has been in development for over 10 years. The fact that we're now at this point where one is being produced every 48 hours is remarkable. On top of that, the Raptor engines are showing clear signs of success. In May 2021, a Starship prototype rocketed up to an altitude of 10 kilometers, during which each Raptor engine was shut off one by one. As it fell back towards Earth and neared the surface, Starship flipped from a horizontal position to a vertical one by igniting 2 of its 3 Raptor engines. It was the first successful landing of a Starship prototype. The key to SpaceX's ability to produce Raptor engines so quickly lies in their obsession with processes. Every single step of the manufacturing process is as optimized as the world's greatest engineers can possibly make it. Even 10 years ago, SpaceX had specialized machines that were essentially 3D printers for tubes. You specify the shape of a tube, and no matter how complicated it is, this machine will perfectly replicate it over and over again. In fact, many of the Raptor engine components are 3D printed, although not all of them are. The reason SpaceX progresses so quickly is its philosophy of viewing every failure as an opportunity to learn. But to actually implement a philosophy like this, you need to have a flexible manufacturing process. 3D printers are the perfect machinery to allow you to slightly tweak the design for something without causing huge delays in the assembly line. Without the ability to 3D print new changes, it could take days or weeks to recast a component based on updated specifications. This is important, as in reality the Raptor engine is still in development. 3D printing is also simply much faster than any single person and can also work 24 hours a day. The more components that SpaceX can 3D print, the faster and more efficient their manufacturing process will be. One of the main things that separates SpaceX from other companies is the shared value they have to solving problems in the most efficient way possible. When Elon Musk speaks on his design philosophy, you get the feeling that if there's a way to claw back 0.01% efficiency in some way, then it will be done. For example, you can be sure that most of the Raptor engine is built by SpaceX themselves. There's as little outsourcing as possible, and they try to integrate as many processes internally as they can. It's these seemingly small things that, over time, add together to create the jaw-dropping improvements that are now becoming commonplace. Having said that, there are still some limits. Once a Raptor engine has been built, it will need to be moved to a test facility, and after that, it'll need to be moved to the launch site. It's likely that SpaceX will eventually have all 3 of these locations right next to each other, but even then, it still places some restrictions on how fast things can move. Another reason for rapid manufacturing time is simply because of how well funded the Starship project actually is. They've raised $7.5 billion, and it really wouldn't be that hard for them to raise more if they needed it. On top of that, they're rolling out Starlink, which will easily net them a few more billion. And that's before Starship is ready to begin ferrying Starlink satellites into orbit on a much larger scale. A Falcon 9 orbital launch can put about 60 Starlink satellites into orbit. But once Starship and the Super Heavy can manage orbital launches, it'll be able to ferry 400 satellites per launch. Obviously, this speeds things up, but it also reduces the cost of launching the Starlink constellation by a few $billion. What this means is that if something is needed to improve manufacturing, it will be done. Starship needs more employees on the assembly line. Done. Need extra space to store and build parts? Done. Need a new piece of machinery that costs millions? Done. The financial incentive is obvious, not to mention the incentive to make humanity multi-planetary. It means that SpaceX can destroy bottlenecks just by throwing money at them. Reducing costs can come later. And then you have the really weird stuff that you don't even think about. In summer 2019, Starship technicians switched to a 24-hour round-the-clock schedule with 4 daily shifts, meaning that each shift overlaps with the one before it and the one after it. Doing it this way facilitates back-and-forth communication that prevents information loss or time delays between teams. If you've ever worked in a place that does 3 daily shifts on a 24-hour round-the-clock schedule, you'll know how easy it is to just blame the shift before you for a problem or leave something difficult for the next shift to deal with. With overlapping shifts, you remove that possibility. If the next shift comes 1 hour before you're due to clock out, you can't exactly leave all the hard problems for them. They're right in front of you, and they won't appreciate it. By doing this, the 4 teams become one well-oiled machine, and as a consequence, Starship production gains a little bit more efficiency and speed. It's likely that the current production rate of Raptor engines is exactly where SpaceX wants it to be. As the design of the Raptor engine nears something like a stable iteration, SpaceX can safely begin ramping up production because they know there won't be frequent large-scale design changes. Of course, the Raptor is still in development, but it's not the same rate of development as it was 5 years ago. In the future, as we see more and more successful test flights using the Raptors, we'll see even faster production. The reason for this is that there's no point rapidly making Raptor engines until you know you're going to use them before a big design change comes through. The final goal of creating a Raptor engine every 12 hours is just on the horizon, and that will be once the engine design is close to finalized. This doesn't mean that SpaceX errs on the side of caution when deciding how many Raptor engines to make. They always want to have enough Raptor engines to supply their testing schedule. Otherwise, they'll bottleneck their own progression if they manufacture too few engines for how many tests they want to do. For this reason, it's more desirable for them to have too many Raptor engines and have some go to waste than to create too few and cause delays in their timeline. It's also the case that if they make a surplus of Raptor engines, the assembly line can take time to upgrade and get itself ready for the inevitable move towards rapid manufacturing. If the assembly lines were running 24/7 from now on, there would be little to no downtime to upgrade processes. It's also true that the Super Heavy is now becoming more and more central to the SpaceX timeline, and each one of those requires 29 Raptor engines, which will increase to 32 later in 2021. That's a lot of Raptor engines that need building. The Super Heavies will eventually be reusable, but for the first few tests, it's more than likely that the Raptor engines will be one-time use only. Whether that's due to the Super Heavy crash landing or the engines just not being in a good enough state to handle multiple launches is a different question. Either way, production must be increased to prepare for future test flights. All of this means we are moving rapidly towards actually putting human beings on Mars. So don't be too quick in thinking you won't be setting foot on Mars one day. According to Elon Musk, there will be loans available for those of us that can't afford it, which is basically all of us. So start sharpening your skills. SpaceX is going to need all kinds of people to go to Mars eventually. And if it isn't you, maybe it's your children or your grandchildren. So how about it? Would you go to Mars if you got the chance? Or would you wait to see if it's safe first? Let us know in the comments down below. Elon Musk is a cautious man when it comes to artificial intelligence, but that won't stop him from unleashing one of the most powerful neural networks the world has ever seen. Over the years, cars have evolved from complicated mechanical machines to smart appliances that even children can learn how to use. I'm not saying that they should, though. In the future, driving is only going to get easier, especially with the rapid-fire development of AI and autonomous driving that's happening right now. It's likely that eventually it'll make no sense for a human to drive a car because the cars are simply better at driving themselves. Granted, this fascinating and revolutionary tech is still in its infancy, but Tesla has already been super successful at it, putting cutting-edge autonomous driving features into all of their cars. You might have already guessed that running a Tesla on autopilot needs a lot more processing power than your dusty old laptop. And you'd be right. Tesla uses powerful computers inside its cars to run its self-driving software. In the summer of 2020, Tesla's iconic CEO tweeted, "Tesla is developing a neural network training computer called Dojo to process truly vast amounts of video data. It's a beast." Just recently, Tesla's director of AI, Andrej Karpathy, casually revealed a new supercomputer that Tesla will use until the neural network Dojo is up and running. Tesla believes that their new computer, which mind you is just a precursor for Dojo, is the 5th most powerful supercomputer in the world in terms of floating point operations per second. According to Andrej, the cluster sports 720 nodes, each powered by 8 of NVIDIA's 80GB model A100 GPUs for a jaw-dropping 5,700 260 A100s throughout the system. This accelerator firepower is complemented by 10 petabytes of hot-tier NVMe storage, which has a transfer rate of 1.6 terabytes per second. You'll be glad to know that one of those bad boys is made up of 1,024 terabytes. This is some serious processing power. It's starting to sound a bit like Skynet. And remember, this isn't even its final form. Just how powerful will Dojo be? If you're wondering why Tesla needs a crazy expensive and powerful supercomputer, it'll all make sense in a minute. You may already know that Tesla uses an advanced driver assistance system called autopilot. This set of features allows the car to utilize 8 outward-facing cameras to gather data about the vehicle's surroundings, and when engaged and where applicable, perform steering, acceleration, and braking controls under driver supervision. Most people assume that Tesla's autopilot system is actually fully self-driving. But it's not. It's a system that uses partial automation to bridge the gap between manual driving and the fully autonomous future that we all dream of. Autopilot uses information gathered from all Tesla vehicles on the road to improve its driving choices. Every time a Tesla drives silently through your neighborhood, the city streets, or the open country, its exterior cameras are constantly collecting data on the outside environment. The car's onboard computers study this data and make predictions of how to behave in any given scenario without actually sending commands to the car itself. All the information gathered by Tesla's EV fleet is shared on a machine learning architecture called a neural network on the supercomputer. The predictions are then recorded and sent back to Tesla to determine if the decision was correct or if any data was misidentified. If there are any irregularities, then the data continuously runs through the supercomputer, constantly tweaking its behavior until it processes without any mistakes. All of this effectively trains Tesla's autopilot. So yeah, if you didn't know, now you know. Teslas can learn. But if you think about it, why wouldn't they? They can dance after all. It's worth noting that there are a few different technological paths that can be taken to achieve autonomous driving. Do you know who's known that for a while now? Tesla's competitors. Some of them make use of remote sensing methods like light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, while others use radar-based sensors to help pick out hard-to-see obstacles on the road. A combination of both technologies with cameras involved as well is also a growing favorite among autonomous tech makers. It's no secret that they haven't been quite as successful as the EV giant that is Tesla. But then again, who has? Typical of Elon Musk, Tesla took a very "I'm going to do my own thing and do it much better" attitude toward its autonomous driving system. Tesla believes that vision-based image recognition using only cameras is the key to affordable and reliable autonomy. As consumer-friendly as it may be, their method of going about self-driving is actually quite self-detrimental and riddled with technical hurdles on paper. Perfecting vision-based autonomy is difficult. It requires the use of a continuously improving system that can quickly adapt to new and ever-changing road conditions. The same system must also be capable of sharing that information with all the other cars on the network and do the same thing all over again for a different car and another one, and so on and so forth. You don't even have to think twice about it. This kind of processing takes nothing less than a supercomputer. If you sort of crunch the numbers and do a little bit of moon math, you'll quickly find out that Tesla isn't messing around. This unnamed supercomputer is most definitely one of the most powerful machines in the world. It's Tesla's third supercomputer, so you already know they've got the hang of it by now. This is their most impressive system so far, and by all indications, it'll be their last one before introducing Dojo to the world. We'll obviously be mentioning this new supercomputer a whole lot, and calling it new supercomputer just isn't working for us. So let's just call their newly launched supercomputer Baby Dojo. Because, well, Tesla hasn't given us its name yet, and why not? That said, Baby Dojo will be used to train both Tesla's patented autopilot and its full self-driving or FSD AI. Speaking at the Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition Conference 2021, which is basically Comic-Con for AI enthusiasts, Andre stated that computer vision is the bread and butter of Tesla's AI team, and it's what enables the highly acclaimed autopilot system. For the computer to work well, a massive data set is needed, data which is conveniently collected from the ever-expanding fleet of Teslas on our roads. That's not all, though, since you also need to train massive neural networks and experiment a whole lot before you can get the autopilot to work just right. I'll bet you don't think of all that when you turn on the autopilot to impress your friends or terrify your parents, huh? Tesla uses its neural networks to label the 4D video data it receives from the cameras fitted in its cars. This data is then used to train the software to enable autonomous navigation using its cameras and radar. However, in May 2021, Tesla moved to a completely camera-based system and dropped the radar sensor in its Model 3 and Model Y cars. We're pretty sure it's obvious by now, but if you hadn't caught on yet, Tesla's long-term goal is to build autonomous cars with better navigation skills than the average human. During his presentation at the conference, Tesla's senior director of AI showed the audience a slide of a photoshopped brain in the driver's seat of a speeding car, captioned with a bunch of statistics.
the stats characterized humans as meat computers with a 250 millisecond reaction latency and a tight control loop with one-ton objects at 80 miles per hour. According to Andre, for Tesla, full self-driving is about replacing that sluggish computer with a safer and faster one, and Baby Dojo is the latest step in that direction. With all the success Tesla has been seeing from its camera-only autonomous navigation, it's easy to see why Tesla is so excited about Baby Dojo and Elon is so invested in bringing Dojo to life. The industry standard when it comes to autonomous technology is definitely LiDAR. Elon's thoughts on LiDAR? Back in 2018, the Tesla CEO called LiDAR a crutch. And he definitely put his money where his mouth is earlier this year when Tesla got rid of the last supplemental LiDAR radars. Going for cameras over LiDAR not only consumes a large amount of processing power, but also requires significant storage in order to stockpile the 1 million 10-second video clips that are used to make up the proprietary Tesla dataset training for autopilot. Get this, the clips alone need 1.5 petabytes of storage, whereas the system itself is capable of hoarding approximately 10 petabytes of data on ultra-fast NVMe flash storage. According to Elon Musk, the colossus that is Project Dojo is slated for release later this year. Touted to be the most powerful supercomputer in the world once it goes online, Project Dojo will be built on proprietary Tesla silicon that is specifically tailored for neural net model training. Dojo's computer architecture will also be built and designed in-house by Tesla. Since Baby Dojo uses NVIDIA-based GPUs, it doesn't appear to be linked to Project Dojo. Tesla has done a great job at keeping its work under wraps, and to this day we know very little about the specifics of Project Dojo. But if its predecessor Baby Dojo here is anything to go by, we're gonna see one hell of a supercomputer by one hell of an EV company. How close do you think we are to having fully self-driving cars on our roads? Let us know all of this and more down in the comments below. Many people know about the Tesla and SpaceX CEOs' rise to global elite status over the years, but what many people don't know is that Elon isn't the only Musk who's been dominating in their field. Elon's younger brother Kimbal Musk is on a mission to feed America with real organic food using sustainable farming techniques. Their sister Tuska Musk is a filmmaker with her own movie streaming service Passionflix. And if you were wondering where the Musk siblings get their sparks of brilliance from, look no further than supermodel May Musk and their father Errol Musk, who, like Elon, was an engineer. One thing that the incredible Musk siblings and their mother have in common, though, is a deep feeling of resentment towards Errol Musk. Elon and May in particular ways have been very open about their feelings towards Errol, with Elon even calling his father a terrible human being at one point. How bad could he be? That's what you're probably asking yourself. Well, let's take a look at some of the insane rules and conditions that May, Elon, Kimbal, and Tuska had to follow in Errol Musk's super smart household. From what we can tell, Errol Musk constantly tried to assert his dominance over his wife and kids. Despite seemingly being the Darth Vader to Elon's Luke Skywalker, Errol wasn't always the villain he is today. On the contrary, Errol was a well-respected and credentialed engineer before he became his family's main antagonist. In his heyday, Errol used to be a prominent, successful electromechanical engineer, pilot, and sailor. Unfortunately, the troubled engineer is more well known for his scandalous life and rocky relationship with his family. According to May Musk, Errol's controlling ways began long before the couple's well-documented troubles, which we'll get into in just a moment. Early on in their relationship, May discovered that Errol was quite aggressive with his decision-making and his demeanor. Speaking in a CBS interview, May detailed that almost immediately after she started dating Errol, he left her and disappeared without a trace for the better part of 2 years. May moved on with her life and started working in Cape Town. 2 years after he had unceremoniously left her, Errol showed up at May's place of work with an engagement ring, downright demanding for her hand in marriage. Now, if this doesn't scream like a control freak's behavior to you, we're pretty sure this next part will. Since May was against the marriage in the first place, Errol enlisted the help of May's father and twin sister, who were both more than willing to help because of Errol's rich family history. May recalled that she had absolutely nothing to do with the planning of her own wedding, which is a shocking statistic by any standards. Errol Musk would constantly undermine his wife May and his children as well. According to Elon, his father had no faith in Elon's ability to do anything, and he constantly reminded him of that. It's hard to think of your dad rooting against you in a Little League game, but maybe that's just because your dad isn't Errol Musk. When Elon moved to Canada in 1989 with dreams of becoming a big name in the tech world, Errol believed that his son would come back home embarrassed and ashamed within a few short months. Elon recalls his father calling him an idiot all the time, and says that those hurtful words were just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, Elon got the last laugh in this scenario, since he's grown to become arguably the biggest name in tech and space travel. When asked about his relationship with Elon by Forbes magazine, Errol persisted that he wasn't actively trying to sabotage his brilliant son.
Actually, Errol recalls helping and supporting Elon whenever the brilliant youngster needed it. When computers for home use were first released to the general public in the 80s, Elon was mesmerized, and he insisted on having one. At the time, using a computer wasn't as easy as it is today, where we set up our social media accounts and are good to go. In the 1980s, you had to take a course to learn how to use the new computers. Since Elon was just 11 years old at the time, Errol used his stellar engineering credentials to inquire about the course from some British computer experts who were in town for a conference. Errol was told that the course was not offered to students, but 11-year-old Elon Musk still insisted on learning how to use and getting his own personal computer. Errol managed to book Elon a seat at the first ever South African computer lecture, which was hosted at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. In classic Dad of the Year fashion, Errol left Elon at the lecture and went to grab some burgers with Kimbal. When Errol and Kimbal got back, people were exiting the lecture hall, but there was no sign of young Elon. Errol then ventured into the university halls and found Elon with his jacket and tie off, engaged in a riveting discussion with the professors from England. One of the professors, who didn't even bother to introduce himself, told Errol that Elon needed to get his hands on one of the new computers. Following that recommendation, Errol went ahead and bought a computer for Elon, which he was happy to get at a discount. With that computer, Elon taught himself how to program using disk operating system. So as bad as Errol may be, Elon sure appreciates the one crucial investment that by all indications led to his passion for tech. In the Errol Musk household, independence was not only lauded, but you could also argue that it was enforced. Of course, this is a great value to have and to teach your kids, but when you're a successful millionaire and your wife and kids can't afford to buy a turkey for Thanksgiving, that's just being plain stingy. Errol amassed a fortune as a real estate developer and an engineering consultant. He owned several luxury homes all over South Africa, some thoroughbred horses, a private yacht, and a Cessna airplane which he loved to fly in back in the day. It's also rumored that Errol was the part owner of an emerald mine near Lake Tanganyika in Zambia. According to tech author and business journalist Ashley Vance, Errol Musk's family have lived in South Africa for so long that they claim an entry into Pretoria's first phone book. With the nice financial cushion of a successful engineering career as well as a sizable family inheritance, Errol might have been one of the wealthiest individuals in South Africa at the time. In a series of tweets about his education and backstory, Elon Musk opened up about his father Errol and the lore that surrounds his wealth, even disclosing that he had ended up with 6 figures in student debt after college. The Tesla CEO was responding to a Twitter user who claimed that Errol's emerald mining operation is what bankrolled Elon's education and privileged upbringing. He didn't own an emerald mine, and I worked my way through college, ending up over $100,000 in student debt. I couldn't even afford a second PC back at Zip2, so I programmed at night and the website only worked during the day. Where's all this BS coming from? When asked about his dad's investment in Zip2, Elon gave a detailed description of all the initial funding that went into the project. Zip2 was started with Elon's contribution of about $2,000 and a home-built overclocked PC, $5,000 from Elon's brother Kimbal, and $8,000 from the late Greg Khoury, Elon's friend and early PayPal investor. Errol Musk provided 10% of a $200,000 angel funding round much later, but according to Elon, the risk had reduced by then and the angel funding round would have happened either way. We're still not sure where the emerald mine rumor started, but knowing Errol, we just can't discount the fact that it may still be true. And speaking of truth, or the lack of it rather, Errol Musk has quite the reputation as a trickster. In her 2020 interview on CBS, May Musk revealed that her marriage to Errol was riddled with marital troubles. Errol's dishonesty and promiscuity broke the couple's 9-year marriage long before they officially divorced. Errol even went as far as to verbally and physically abuse May, which is aggravated by the fact that he never even got a slap on the wrist for his wrongdoing. Speaking to Business Insider South Africa, Errol admitted that he was really terrible during his marriage to May Musk. Errol disclosed that he had a few mistresses on the side and that he didn't quite see the problem with what he was doing. I screwed up the marriage. I was totally responsible. It didn't work out too well in the end. My former wife doesn't speak to me. Even when we're together, she won't speak to me. And from being left to raise 3 young kids on her own to enduring years of domestic abuse, you could say that May has every right to ghost him. After Errol and May Musk divorced in 1979, Errol later married Heidi Marie, a widow and mother of 3 kids. Errol and Heidi also had 2 daughters together. If you were wondering where the Musk family's deep-seated animosity towards Errol comes from, you might want to strap in, because the answer is crazier than you may think. In 2017, The Times UK reported that Errol had fathered a child with his stepdaughter, Jana Bezos. Yes, you heard that right. Elon Musk's dad had a child with his own stepdaughter. At the time the story broke, Errol Musk was 72 years old, while his stepdaughter Jana was 30. Errol had married Jana's mother Heidi when Jana was just 4 years old. To add insult to an already serious injury, Elon Musk was largely unbothered by all the blowback and criticism he would get from literally all of his relatives. When he was interviewed on Harper's Bazaar, a UK-based news outlet, Errol conveniently doesn't see Yana as his stepdaughter. According to Errol, although he met her as a little girl, he said that she was raised for long periods outside the home that Errol shared with her mother Heidi. Of course, this moot point just makes the shady engineer's antics seem even shadier. It also gives a lot of credibility to the rest of the Musk family's long-standing claims of Errol being a very unpleasant person to be with. Today, Elon Musk is persona non grata with the Musk family, and Elon has even publicly stated that he does not intend to introduce his kids to their grandfather. In his legendary Rolling Stone interview, Elon called his father a terrible human being who would have a carefully thought-out plan of evil. That might have seemed like a stretch at the time to the public, but knowing what we know now, it's easy to see why the Musk family alienated Errol. Do you think the Musk family will?
SpaceX is going to begin cleaning up the skies by gobbling up space junk using starships. On July 3, 2021, a Twitter user asked Elon if he had any ideas on how he might keep space clean enough so that orbital businesses in the future won't run into any major problems. He replied with, "Yes, we can fly Starship around space and chomp up debris with the moving fairing door. The idea is quite straightforward conceptually, but in practice, it's extremely difficult. Starships have something called a fairing door, which can open up once the aircraft reaches orbit. Starship can then deploy spacecraft, and the fairing door will close itself before Starship returns to Earth. So, for the purpose of clearing space debris, those same doors would open up to allow space junk to be stored in the cargo hold, where it can be brought back down to the surface. Another option might be to move the piece of debris to a lower orbit, where it will decay naturally. At the moment, it's thought these Pac-Man starships will be going after big pieces of litter, dead satellites, and even spare rocket parts. The smaller pieces of space debris might not be financially worth the effort of an entire mission using Starship. It's also much harder to track smaller pieces of debris, so targeting them for chomping would be even harder. Well, that is until there's a cheap method of vacuuming hundreds of small pieces of debris through the fairing door. The question is, how do you vacuum the vacuum of space? We'll leave that for another video. It all sounds a bit crazy, but this isn't the first time this idea has been talked about. Back in October 2020, the president of SpaceX, Gwynne Shotwell, also said that Starship could one day navigate Earth's orbit collecting space debris where it could then store it in the cargo bay.
It's not going to be easy, but I do believe that Starship offers the possibility of going and doing that.
Right now, it's estimated that there are over 750,000 objects larger than 1 centimeter orbiting Earth. And let's be honest, we've only just begun the era of commercial spaceflight. If we discount the tiny ones, then we get 29,000 pieces of debris that are bigger than 10 centimeters, and those are more likely to be the target of any salvaging missions. That 29,000 number is only going to get bigger over time if we do nothing about it. And as more and more objects end up blazing around the Earth at incomprehensible speeds, the more chance there is of serious accidents. A collision between two large objects that are traveling tens of thousands of miles per hour will blow each other into smithereens, and it'll create thousands of new pieces of debris exploding in all directions. And then those objects can collide with other objects, which create even more pieces of debris. Then you're left with a shell of space debris around the Earth that not only makes space flights that much more challenging, but will also be extremely damaging for astronomers who want a clear view of the night sky. The worst case scenario is something called the Kessler syndrome. This is a term coined by NASA scientist Donald Kessler in 1978. His idea was that if there were enough debris in orbit that could cause one collision to cause another collision, then it could cause a cascading chain of debris colliding into one another. It could render orbital missions and space travel too dangerous for multiple generations. The chances of this happening are very low at the moment, but it's still something that companies like SpaceX will be thinking about. SpaceX has already come under fire by astronomers and critics who are concerned that their satellites are too bright. They reflect sunlight back down to Earth, which causes them to be very bright at dusk and dawn. This is coincidentally the same time that astronomers look for black holes, near-Earth objects like asteroids and comets, and even new planets. SpaceX has tried to fix this by coating the satellites in black and removing reflective materials from the parts of the satellites that face Earth, but even with these improvements, they still block the night sky. To actually stop the satellites from obstructing the view of astronomers, you'd need some kind of hyper-advanced cloaking technology straight out of Star Trek. This gives us less room to leave useless junk floating around in orbit, which is why SpaceX is beginning to really think about cleaning everything up. But it's not just that it annoys astronomers. Rogue space junk can pose a real threat to human life. On a recent SpaceX Dragon flight, a piece of space debris came within 28 miles of the capsule, which actually had crew members aboard. The crew were told to put their suits back on, cover the windows with Kevlar blankets, and to get strapped into their seats just in case of rapid air pressure loss. It fortunately turned out to be a false alarm, as there was apparently no risk the debris would collide with the capsule. But even so, the threat is very real. Even more recently, the International Space Station was hit in June 2021. A robotic arm was hit by a small piece of debris that was clearly traveling very fast because it went straight into the arm and out the other side like it was nothing. The ISS crew didn't even notice it happened until a routine inspection of the station was carried out. The robotic arm still works just fine though, which is quite strange considering it now has a hole going all the way through it. Currently, the ISS and the Chinese space station are the only space stations manned with crew members, but in the future, it's going to increase. If nothing is done, orbital debris could one day pose a real threat to the astronauts who live in orbit, so it's good that SpaceX and others are already thinking of how to solve the problem. The ISS isn't completely defenseless though. There's ongoing research into materials and shielding configurations that could actually protect against space debris traveling at orbital speeds. There are also ways in which the crew can protect itself if a debris collision does occur, but this technology hopefully won't be needed all the time if humanity can be a little bit cleaner with its space adventures. There are some big hurdles to overcome before Starship can actually begin capturing debris though. Unfortunately, some of these are going to involve political and legal problems. For example, China is banned from entering the ISS. If progress was the main priority, then they wouldn't be banned at all, which proves there's always a political element to these things. As we know, SpaceX isn't a big fan of disposable rockets, and so if they were to begin cleaning up space debris soon, they'd likely be picking up things that were put up there by other companies and even other countries. Would Russia or China really allow Elon Musk to chomp up some of their dead satellites or rocket parts and take them back to Earth without saying anything? Or imagine if Jeff Bezos' company, Blue Origin, actually makes it to orbit one day. Will Jeff be okay with Starship coming along and taking some of its failed rocket tests back to Starbase? Probably not. It's going to be a bit similar to how shipwrecks are handled. Maybe after a certain period of time, a piece of space debris will no longer be owned by the people who put it there. This would allow SpaceX or even other companies and countries to go and take it for themselves. Maybe one day SpaceX will sell its starships to private salvaging companies so they can go up into orbit and poke around for some valuable debris. Who knows, it could be a whole new industry: space debris salvaging. There are lots of reasons why someone might want their orbital debris brought back down to Earth. Many of the things zooming around the planet have immense historical value and could be placed in museums, or they could be sold to private individuals and collectors. One example might be the Hubble Space Telescope. Of course, this stuff would run into the political and legal problems we mentioned earlier. It's possible as well that a Starlink satellite deployed into space develops a slight problem. If it were cheap enough, maybe SpaceX would want to chomp it up, bring it back to Earth, repair it, and redeploy it again. It's pretty unlikely though, because you never know what condition the broken satellite was really in. In that case, it could be brought back like any other piece of debris. Not to mention that SpaceX would massively benefit from the PR that cleaning up space would bring. After all, if we're gonna have Starship flights every day some point in the future, then clear skies are gonna make it much easier. But it does seem like it could become SpaceX's responsibility, as it's the private company that's doing the most work. SpaceX hopes to put 42,000 Starlink satellites in orbit by the year 2027. If they achieve this, they'll be by far the industry leaders in low Earth orbit. It seems like they're already aware of the problems this might cause because they've already lowered the entire constellation's orbit. By doing this, they've made it so the satellites will decay much faster. It also reduces the distance between the satellites and your PC, so it'll probably reduce lag a bit. So it seems like a win-win. It does sound extremely expensive to launch a Starship simply to bring back a few pieces of debris though. If we get really futuristic, we can see the potential for something magnificent. If SpaceX or another company or even a country was to take the space debris problem seriously, maybe they'd build a recycling space station. This way you could have multiple Starships orbiting the Earth and collecting pieces of debris, and once they've completed their task, they could dock at the recycling station. From there, the debris from multiple Starships could be loaded into another Starship. This Starship would be the one that returns to Earth with the debris. By doing it like this, there are way fewer missions needed to go from Earth to orbit, which would be much cheaper. What do you think the future of space debris salvaging looks like? Let us know in the comments down below. We hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and be sure to turn on the notification bell. We've got so many more interesting videos in the pipeline. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, welcome to the future.